developing the mental and emotional acuity and literacy to feel the right emotion at the right moment and experience it fully. That's what we mean by living richly.
Welcome to the Living Richly podcast. My name is Rob Dale, and I am with a couple of acquaintances.
We've been downgraded.
We used to be great friends.
Sorry about that last episode.
And Eric Deschamps and Trevor Munven, and
We've been downgraded.
I am emotionally disconnected from the two of you, and as a result of that, I'd like to talk about heart. We are actually talking about the four elements as we continue to explore living richly. I want to thank all of you that have taken this journey with us. We began to talk about a couple of episodes ago, and I want to encourage you, if you haven't, to listen to that episode 11, where we kind of give an overview of the four elements and why they are part of the living richly journey, why they matter,
right.
The role that they play. And then we began to talk about mindset in our last episode, and now we're going to be looking at the notion of fire and the connection there to heart. And so maybe we'll start the same way that we did with the last episode and just take a few minutes to talk about what do we mean by heart? What don't we mean? How do we really understand that as we start to explore what that looks like? So who wants to jump in and give us a little bit of an idea of what is heart to Trevor?
That was so not a question.
You are.
Who wants to jump in? And
who wants to jump in?
You
Trevor,
got voluntold.
Since you are such a master of this area, and this has been the area.
Let me tell you about all my emotion.
Let's talk about heart. So, what is heart?
Heart, right? It's our emotional state, and it's our relationships, right?
A small topic.
That's
small
right.
topic.
So this will be a short episode.
Maybe 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Right. And this is, we spend so much of our lives in this space trying to navigate what it is we're feeling or think we're feeling, and what to do about it. And then we're also trying constantly to find some sense of connection, right? It's a core human need is connection.
Yeah.
Whether that's love or peer groups or teams or clubs or whatever, we're looking for that sense of connection with other people through friendship, through a host of things. And so, like, this is so central. Yeah. This is so central, and there's so much struggle associated with it as well, as we're trying to figure out, what am I feeling, right? What does that mean? And what do I do next?
Right.
And what effect is that having on the relationship I'm having with others? What's that connection I have? Is it an insecure attachment, or is it secure? Like, do I feel like I can say uncomfortable, difficult things from a good, healthy place and still know with that person, with you guys, with my kids, my wife, my family, my whoever, I'm still good. Yeah. It doesn't mean the relationship's at risk every time I open my mouth or express a view around it. And so that requires some accountability on our side in terms of, do we actually understand what's going on? Ideally, it involves some accountability with the other person as well, their ability to catch what we're throwing, so to speak. But to be able to do that from a very healthy place instead of a reactive, defensive, sometimes offensive way as well, as we're learning to actually navigate these things and use these.
You know, Eric, when you talk about heart, you use a phrase, loving well.
Right.
Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, to Trevor's point, it really does talk about our relationships when we think of matters of the heart. I remember writing this in my journal months ago as I sort of discovered for myself the four elements as a model to define what does my best self look like on these different fronts. And I wrote the phrase. I'd never heard this phrase before, and if somebody else has coined it somewhere else, then that's awesome. But for me, it was brand new. It was becoming a master heartist, a masterful heartist, heartist in terms of becoming more skilled in matters of the heart, both in managing my emotional life and not just managing bad emotions, but learning to increase that emotional range in a healthier way, to experience more of life, to live more richly is going to tap into that more meaningfully. And then the other dimension of how does that look and how am I doing in my relationships? And for me, loving well is being in these life-giving, loving relationships that are mutually nurturing, mutually beneficial, where we're loving and being loved, right? And what does that look like for me? The third dimension that I would add to it, and we may not have time in today's episode to cover, but I think the fire element also speaks to matters of the heart in terms of passion. What are we passionate about in life, about purpose and what we give ourselves to and what we do, not again as an escape from dealing with some of this stuff or addressing some of these issues, but as an expression of our most authentic self.
So, and absolutely, if we can get into the all three of these aspects of it, I think it would be great for us to be able to have that opportunity. Maybe let's start with emotions, and then we can talk about relationships, and then if we have time to look into passion and how that is expressed.
Yes, let's three guys talk about our emotions,
but
shall we?
Let's talk about our emotions. We are emotional beings.
We are.
And yet
We brought Steve, our producer, with us because he's actually going to do it today.
Yeah,
There's an emotion.
I think he's having a panic attack over there.
there's an emotion that's happening right now. Yeah. And at the risk of stereotype or the reality is that certainly this is an area that women seem to be able to express in a more healthy way than men. We're conditioned, whether it's through childhood or whatever, that we just simply don't know how to even have a conversation around emotions, let alone experience or express them.
Right. And I think this is where range is really important as a topic. You saw me react to that when you mentioned that as well. And actually being able to identify what we're actually feeling is so critical. I know one of the things I look back through my life and I'm like, it bugs me is that I became that middle-aged, narrow emotionally ranged individual that I thought I would never be. Never be.
Right.
And I found myself there. I was like, right. It was frustrating. And so a lot of the path for me over the last while has been around expanding that range again, right? And we joke that Trev's one emotion is rage. And it's more than that. But
We joke. He still thinks we're joking,
right, guys? Good.
You just felt another one. That's another one.
Fear, vulnerability. I think it's interesting to hear people talk about emotions. People say, that person, they're not very emotional. No, that's not it. I'm not sure there's anything that calibrates to say this person's more or less emotional than someone.
So
that
interesting
they're not
that people do
feeling things, right?
Yeah.
And it's said in a
But it's
negative way.
expressive.
But it's even like
Right.
that person's being emotional. The message that's received is, and we get that sometimes that's used to describe someone who's perhaps being overly emotional in a given
dramatic.
context, or that perhaps the audio and the video is not quite lining up,
Right.
or the reaction may be more than what the situation calls for. But the message that's received is that emotions are bad.
Emotions are bad.
That especially what we would consider negative emotion. I think laughter and joy, that would be seen as a good thing.
Only to a certain level, and then it's
Right.
like you laugh too loud, you're
Right.
too
Well,
joyful,
then that
you're
would cut
too
me out
happy,
of
right?
most
It's like,
people's.
You're laughing too loud at the funeral.
right, right. Right. Timing's everything. So
Timing and
it's
context.
It's to be able to recognize that there's a difference between, people claiming people are not emotional or not expressive in their emotions, because that's a different thing.
Right.
It's the behavioral representation of what's going on inside of those feelings. I think, especially for guys, right? They're told, don't cry, don't this, don't that. Right. It's always what you shouldn't do rather than what you do. And then how we respond to it in those moments is incredibly important. I know with my kids, the first thing, if I see them having an emotion, if I see an emotion going through them, which is how I like to think about it, I like to get them to say, what's the feeling you have?
Right. Right.
It seems like a big feeling is with you right now.
Well, you're
What
teaching
is it?
them. You're teaching them in that moment, and unfortunately, most of us growing up did not get this kind of instruction or coaching or support. So as a result, we have very limited language to describe what we're feeling.
Right.
Our emotion, we're like emotionally illiterate. We ask people how they're feeling, and you're typically going to get what? I'm feeling good, or I'm feeling bad. Not very specific.
Yeah.
So to your point, when you're helping your kids name it, you're actually teaching them some emotional literacy to understand what's passing through them, and then what to do with that.
Yeah, it's like, what's the sticker that goes with that feeling?
Right.
What label would you put on that?
Yeah.
Right. And then I think the second piece, which is so important, is to understand the dynamic of feelings. Right. They're as functional as everything else.
They're necessary.
That makes us human, right?
Exactly.
Exactly.
Let's talk about this, because I think, again, I know a lot of really successful people who are great thinkers, super smart, really brilliant, who I might say have other elements that we in the 4 elements well developed or on their way, and yet are like, it's almost, again, that emotions are seen as weakness. Emotions are seen as a liability and not an asset, and they describe being strong and resilient as almost, I would say, well, I don't know. To me, you might be borderline just cut off or shut off or shut down. So talk to us about the function of emotion.
Yeah, I mean, they're so purposeful. They're so purposeful because they're there to help us put our attention on things that matter. Like that's really their job.
Right.
They're
like an early warning detection
early
system.
warning or messengers. I like them as messengers because it's not always a warning, right? It's always like, hey, more of this.
Yeah.
Right. So think of them as messengers, and very often I think we get so hung up with the messenger we skip the message.
Right.
Right. And so we get so obsessed with the feeling that shows up physically, which is the arrival of the messenger.
Right.
Right. It could be sudden fear. Well, that's a message. Right. Or it could be frustration. Let's use frustration because we all get it, I think.
Which is, it's actually a form of anger. Frustration it's an anger emotion.
So when we get that feeling of frustration in our body, the first thing we need to do when we feel something is go, what is that? And you go, I'm frustrated. Okay, good. Like, we got a sticker. We know what that is. So frustration is the feeling you get when you're not getting what you want.
Right.
So suddenly, the moment you can do that, if you say, what's the feeling? It's frustration. Why am I frustrated? I'm not getting something I want. Right. The moment you can say that, you've changed your relationship with the feeling, right? Because people say you have to process your emotions. I'm like, okay. Like I still don't know what to do. So
I can hear him saying
right. Yeah. So this is my version of like,
well, I've been
process an emotion.
I've
like,
read that when you're able to name it, you actually dial it down.
Right.
So when you're able to say, "Oh, I'm feeling frustrated," the level of frustration almost doesn't mean it goes away, but because you're able to identify it, you're able to regulate it more readily.
Yeah.
I'm feeling anger. I'm feeling angry about this right now, and you find that the degree of anger diminishes because now you know what's happening, as opposed to because feelings they most of them happen in the subconscious. They're happening, but we're not necessarily paying attention to it.
And all of a sudden it just shows up.
It just shows up.
It feels like it just shows up. It's not as simple as that. We'll get into that later.
Yeah.
But that notion that all of a sudden it's here and we can name it. So there's this whole world where you've probably heard this in movies where if there's like a demon or whatever, if you can learn the demon's name, then you can control it. A lot of that came out of the early desert fathers and mothers post Jesus living in the wilderness as he had as well, starting to say they would talk about naming their demons. And those demons were these strong emotions, pride, gluttony, like all of those things, 7 deadly sins.
They had to describe.
And it became this larger piece because the moment you can name it is the moment where you create distinction between subject and object. You are no longer your feeling. You're the thing. You are the you observing the feeling.
Right.
And so its control is lessened because you realize I'm not frustrated. I'm having a feeling of frustration.
Right.
And so we've separated that. So then if we know with frustration, I'm not getting what I want, the next healthy step is to say, what do I want? What's the thing that I want? And am I getting it or not? Like we start to just, we curiously start to poke at it a bit and start to go, what's going on there? If you go, well, I want this. Well, then we look and say, is that the healthiest thing for you to want?
Right.
Is that a healthy want?
Right.
You kind of go, oh, well, what I really want is, and we need to start to explore saying, is that what you really want? And is that the thing that you need in your life? Is that the healthiest expression as well?
Another version of that is that expectation, that unmet expectation that I have about this situation or this person, is it in line with reality?
Exactly.
Is it am I expecting something that really is out of sync with reality, and therefore the more I continue to want that thing, the more frustrated I'm going to be.
Right.
So this is where, again, feelings and our thought life are so closely linked.
So linked.
They're intertwined so deeply because, again, the feeling reveals the thought. Changing the thought impacts the feeling.
Exactly. And so use a relationship as an example. How many people are frustrated in their relationships? Lots. But have they ever, so they're not getting what they want. Do you even know exactly what it is you want? Can you say it to yourself? And does the other person know?
Right.
What's what reasonable expectation is there that someone else will know? And you say, well, they just know me. I'm like, nah, you know what? We barely know ourselves. Like if we've said anything, it's like there's so much mystery in terms of what's going on with us. How much of it is driven by our own subconscious that we don't have immediate access to easily all the time? What are the odds that I'm going to be able to understand your subconscious to meet all of your needs? This is where, when we look at a frustration, you start to say, you know what, this is a great opportunity because, you know what, I don't think I've ever been clear to say this is what I need or what I don't need.
Right. And you know what I love about what you're saying and how you're saying that is it puts the onus and the power on yourself to control your feelings. You know, instead of, Eric, you make me feel frustrated or angry or whatever.
No, I make me feel frustrated.
Exactly. It removes that you suddenly are no longer empowering other people with your feelings when you start to think through and you identify your feelings and you begin to process, oh, well, what am I really looking for here? What really is happening? What happens there is, and this is the part where it comes into living richly, you have full control in living richly. You have full control over your emotional experiences because they're from within. They're not external.
Well, it's the notion, again, we're talking about the element of fire. Fire, properly used, can bring warmth. It can bring light. It can bring comfort. It can bring peace. I mean, think of sitting in front of a nice fire in the fireplace and staring into the flames. I know I can do that. I can
do
get
it forever.
lost.
Yeah.
Forever.
Absolutely.
And yet that same fire,
I'm going to
go
now.
make a fire.
No.
That same element outside of those constructs, like if we just let it run loose, that same element can burn the whole fucking house down. And
Wildfire.
that's right. It's like wildfire. And that's our emotional life. Most of us are very familiar with the survival emotions: fear, anger, frustration, guilt, shame. Like these are what are often referred to as survival emotions, and we may not be able to name them, but that's where we're living so much of the time. When we talk about living richly and leaning into the best version of your heart, is what if you could dial down the volume on those survival emotions and start dialing up the volume on the more elevated emotions of joy and serenity and peace, and probably the best and highest emotion of them all, which is gratitude. Because when you are living in gratitude, the world opens up to you. It's actually been described as the elevated emotion that is when you're in that emotional state, you are most open to receive anything. Like you're in the best possible way. What if and so for those of you listening, saying, well, what's this deal with all this talk about feelings? Listen, think about just the last 24 hours. How many times perhaps you have not felt great? Or you've had negative emotions this week. And what if you could dial that down and not eliminate? I don't think it's ever about eliminating it, but what if you could have more control, exert more control about what you're feeling? Again, not being a victim, you make me feel, but understand that you've never had a feeling. You did not create, as we stated in the last episode. You create your emotional state. And so if we can create misery, if we can create sadness, if we can create suffering, we can also create joy and fulfillment and serenity and peace and happiness. These are all available to us, but it does mean a more disciplined approach to acknowledging what we're experiencing and then shifting both our thinking and our feeling around it.
We can be more active in our engagement with our emotions, because it's not about control.
No.
It's not because, and the reason I don't like the word control is because usually that leads to like people just saying, all right, I'll shut her down.
Right.
I'm like, no, that's
control
not it.
and protection
Right.
is a closed state.
very closed
right.
state.
We want to be in an open state. We want to nurture
Say,
more
what is
positive
that?
emotions.
What is that, right? So let's use sadness as another one. If you're feeling sad,
Right.
kind of go, I just feel so sad.
Sad is not bad.
No, sad is I've lost something. It's a
Right.
feeling of loss. It's like grief light,
Right.
right? And so there's a sense of loss. And so we need to look and say, what have I lost here? So let's say you've had a fight with someone. Well, maybe I've lost some connection. Maybe I've lost a friendship. Maybe I've lost some time. Maybe I've lost some respect. Maybe I've lost maybe I've lost the false picture I was carrying around of this person. And maybe I wasn't letting them be human.
Right.
Right. Like all of these things can be, but by virtue of asking the question, we've actively engaged with that emotion. If we don't do that, what happens very often is the emotion just stays. The messenger is still there waiting to hand you the message, and you're not taking it. And so we may get distracted, but we kind of come back and we have this low grade sad. We have this low grade frustration. We have this low grade whatever. Right. And so it's this piece where we can actively engage with our emotions to understand what's going on here, because as we do that, it transforms us. And that's the other part that I like about fire is its transformative nature. Right. We talked about alchemy, I think, in the last one.
Yeah.
Right? I think I see very often alchemy as a great metaphor.
Right.
Right. It was about how do you take base metals and turn them into gold? Right. Like I want to make gold.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I think maybe sometimes we're that base, and by base I mean elemental.
Right.
Piece,
Base not bad.
Right? Base not bad.
No.
That's right.
Yeah.
But we are that core thing that can be transformed into and not just a better version of you. Just it's like it reveals the true value and worth of who you are.
Right.
And the more we do it, the more we reveal. And that can be a scary thing. I know for me for a long time, that's been a scary thing is I don't want people to see who I am.
Right.
I don't want to reveal that.
Right.
But I'm telling you, alchemy is the transformation of self, and fire does that, right? Fire, like we know, fire, no matter can be created nor destroyed, right?
Right.
A fundamental rule of physics. But it's always transformed.
Right.
And so to think of it in terms of that transformative nature, through how we experience our emotions, through how we track it back to our thoughts as well, to transform not just us but our lives, because we're not going to get those external things that maybe we want if we don't have those internal pieces that are so fundamental. And so like those things have to be in alignment. You're not going to get a good life externally if you're living shit internally. Let me finish the sentence. In a sustained way.
Right.
Because I know people who have all the things, and bit by bit, the things just erode. They disappear, they fall away, or they don't matter even if they do stay, because what they're after is that inner transformation, but they've been working on the external because it's more tangible.
Right.
Right. And emotions...
You know,
a big part of that.
I so appreciate the idea of nurturing those emotions, and even sad is not bad.
It's just a feeling.
Grief is not bad. Like we talk about range,
right? Well,
go
let me just to give as an example, like when Katie died, I had such an unhealthy view of grief that I believed that if I grieved, I didn't have faith. Right, because I, of course, was a preacher at the time, and we, we do not grieve as those who have no hope. Now, if you actually notice what that biblical passage says, is it doesn't say we don't grieve. It didn't. So even in the good book, it didn't say don't grieve because you are, Katie's in heaven and all of this. It was you may grieve. There might be a different element of grief. And certainly Katie's mom, she grieved in a healthy way and processed that. For me, I was immediately back into I need to show all of the positivity, and that's a negative feeling. That's a negative emotion. What I love so much is being able to now be in a place where I can both embrace the happy, fun, pleasurable feelings, but you can also embrace sadness and grief and hurt, and not embrace them as in you hold them close and say, yeah, I'm hurt, so therefore justifying whatever, but be able to now take that and to even sometimes journey through it, and to really come out of that place. Okay, what am I learning? What am I growing? And all of that. There's so much
good.
power in that.
So good. Because when we talk about, even earlier when I mentioned, what if you could dial down on some of those experience of those survival emotions and dial up the noise or the volume on the more elevated ones. That doesn't mean you're always going to be living in the elevated ones. I think what we're talking about here, when we talk about the fire element as your heart, the best version of your heart, is its ability to experience the right emotion in the right situation. And take grief, for example, right? Grief is one that's very difficult, complicated for many of us. I still remember years ago, my dad had passed away, and that was so hard. And then another relative was my grandmother, I believe, if my memory's serving me right. That whole time period when she passed away is a blur to me. Right. All I can remember feeling in that moment was anger. I was so angry that yet somebody else was out of my life now, and that I wouldn't get to spend any time. That was the anger is all I could feel. Now I know anger is a natural stage of grief if you understand the stages of grief, but I was stuck in anger and I couldn't properly grieve because I didn't understand, again, and there's all kinds of reasons for that. You talk about some of them for you, and very similar for me. Many of those emotions, the negative emotions, were seen as that's bad. If you feel unnecessary sadness or grief or whatever, it's a sign that you're not doing the faith thing correctly, right? So we're not, and I think outside of even religion, I think there are aspects of even positive psychology and the pop psych culture that would say, always be feeling happy and regardless. I think that's dishonest. I don't think that's what we mean by this. It's developing the mental and emotional acuity and literacy to feel the right emotion at the right moment and experience it fully. That's what we mean by living richly.
We just don't want to
not getting stuck.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's the stuckness, because what that tells us is emotions are controlling us. We actually don't have to control them. We need to actively engage with them. But I think what we do need to do is move from a state where emotions are controlling us, that we think, if I've got the feeling, then it must be I'm bad or this is bad. I'm like, it just is.
Yeah.
It just is. And again, it's kind of like the thoughts. It's like, it's just a thought.
Right.
It's just a feeling. And some of them are more comfortable than others. Yeah. Happiness is a great one. Joy is a great one. Silliness is a great one, right? Discovery is a great one. Like curiosity, for me, a great one.
Yeah.
They all have their own nature. And we just need to accept that and not go, this is bad, so that's bad, and things are bad. Going, I just feel loss here.
Right.
I feel sad, or I have a feeling right now, or I am feeling sad right now. I often try to stay away from the language of I am this.
Right. I feel this.
I feel this.
Yes.
I think
so true.
Because we reinforce in our identity what we are.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Again, power of affirmation. Power of affirmation. I love this whole notion of how it's about getting present. We talked about, you asked in the last episode, Rob, what might people do to start discovering and seeing some of the negative thinking or beliefs that they have about themselves. And we talked about the importance of just beginning to get present to it, pay attention.
Yeah.
Right. And I think it's the same with our emotional life. It's getting present, paying attention. What is it that I'm feeling? And taking an active role in both discovering that, understanding it, and learning to express it more fully. A couple of years ago, I wrote a series of guiding principles for my life, and I wrote this one down, really not knowing what I was saying at the time. But it is, I'm committed to choosing my thoughts, feelings, and actions, and to interrupting my automatic pilot more often. I will not be a puppet on strings of my own making. And this was this whole notion of the strings that I feel that are pulling at my life, that are those quote unquote invisible forces that are acting from the shadows and influencing my thoughts, actions, decisions, feelings. They're not all that foreign to me. I created most of those.
We can make them visible.
We can make them visible. We can bring them into the light, start calling them what they are, started getting present, paying attention to them, and then beginning to carve a better way forward. One of the things that's really fascinating, I'm still very much engaged in this work, and as much I think as we're talking about these issues, these are things that we're very much still learning and practicing and discovering. None of these episodes are us saying, "Hey, we've got it figured out." This is more like we're on a journey, and we've invited you to join us, and we continue to discover things. But back to Dr. Sherry for a moment, who's our coach. We work with her, our coach and therapist is probably the best way to put it. And she'll often, as I'm describing a painful situation or something really hard that happened, whether it's a present situation or a past event that we're exploring together, and she says, "Eric, do you ever notice that when you're talking about hard things, you're smiling?" And it was like, "Really?" She goes, "You're smiling." And she says, "If I was talking about that, I would not be smiling." She says, "I'm sitting here and I'm feeling pain for you. I'm feeling sadness for what happened to you and what you went through and what you experienced. And yet your emotions are out of sync. The audio and the video is not lining up. And again, part of that is this notion of just being trained over time, training myself over time, being influenced. Certainly we are influenced by outside forces, for sure, context and upbringing and all of that. But we still get to choose, even if we're choosing unconsciously, we're still choosing that negative feelings are bad. Right? That you shouldn't be experiencing those. And so part of my work is becoming present to when is the emotion that I'm expressing in this moment, is it lining up with what's actually happening? Right. Or is there a disconnect? Because if there's a disconnect, there's something to be looked at there.
Too little or too much.
Right.
Right. So we see the overreaction sometimes.
Right.
We also very commonly with men see the non-reaction.
And
the
that
numbness,
seems to be socially acceptable.
Right. People seem okay with that. It doesn't upset people.
The
right?
overreaction, of course, that's not okay. Like if you lose your cool and you get angry or you become too emotional, right, in a situation, well, that's looked down upon. And yet the no reaction, the non-reaction is almost prized.
Yeah, playing to numbness, right?
Right.
So you see, how many, I don't know, action heroes are the emotionally unavailable, numb, highly competent male, right? Like they have all these super skills.
That's what's
I look
celebrated.
and go, wow, like
no wonder men are so fucked up.
Am I supposed to be able to do that? Because I have a little bit of a distance to go. But also, barely available to their own emotional set, and this is what we see over and over. But we also see it outside the movies. Right. We see it with people all the time, and I know I've been there for a long time as well. And it's just a lot of it was these feelings are uncomfortable. I don't know what to do with them, and so it's either stay trapped in them, which is like, I'm not staying in that. So you shut it off.
And think about this. If you shut off, whenever we shut ourselves down, if we prescribe to the notion that the relationship we have with ourselves determines the quality of every other relation, sets the tone for every other relationship we have. And let's talk about love relationships for a moment. Your most significant relationship, that and your kids if you have children, right? But those romantic relationships, if we are shut off, partially shut off, then how can we bring?
Right.
What are we bringing into other relationships? We're bringing partial self. We're bringing a self that is alive in some regards and shut down in others. And so if we're going to connect meaningfully in a loving relationship with someone else, it has to start with a loving relationship towards self. Radical self-acceptance is where it all begins, right? Is this notion of getting present to what I'm feeling. I think when we hear, and I'm sure our female listeners could teach us quite a bit on what it means to be emotionally detached, emotionally unavailable. I think guys have earned a reputation for that, and part of it is, again, the lessons we've learned or not learned, or the culture that we've been raised in and the models that we've been presented. And I think there is a shift beginning to happen where men are waking up and saying, I don't want to be numb anymore. How can numbness and living richly even coincide? They don't. That means part of me is not alive.
Right. And then you got this dichotomy of, okay, so do I go with numb where I can't feel anything, or this other stuff where I don't know what the hell to do with it?
Right. Where I feel like I'm out of control.
Right.
I'm not, but
that's the literacy piece. That's the learning, like, what do I do? Because you're right. if we say this stuff's too scary and we close the gates, well, let's say we close them 50%. Well, then we can only get out 50%. If we close them 80%, we can only get out 20%.
Right.
Like that piece around our capacity to connect in a meaningful way with others has to do fundamentally with our ability to process this stuff, to learn to be okay with it, to learn that a strong feeling doesn't mean things are bad. It just means it's a big message. So pay attention.
Pay attention.
And start to work your way through it.
Right.
And even if I go back to frustration, if I'm in a relationship and I kind of go, I'm frustrated. Why? I'm not getting what I want. Well, what do I want? I want this stuff. Does that person know that? If I say, yeah, actually, I've told them like 25 times in different ways in these contexts, then that's actually very useful to say, maybe this isn't working.
Right.
Or maybe we need to elevate the conversation or get some professional help or whatever. It lets me take the emotion and move it into action.
Right.
Remember, right? Motivare is still the root word of emotion, and it means it's Latin for motion.
Right.
Right. We want to move. This stuff is supposed to move. If the
It's
other
when it gets stuck in us.
Then it's a problem.
It causes, and I think the same with negative thoughts, right?
Yeah.
Negative thinking, like thoughts that just are meant to pass through the mind, the subconscious. I even read recently that dreams, you ever have those dreams where you wake up and you go, oh, like I'm glad I'm awake now, because it felt like there was a bunch of negativity in the dream that you could sort of, I think that was that, and I think this was this. Well, I've read that the brain, that's the brain, literally just the subconscious flushing out.
Taking out the trash.
Negative. So now I used to wake up from dreams like that and go, and it might set me off to have a bad day because I woke up sort of on the wrong side of the bed. And now I wake up and I'm like, oh, good, look at that.
So it's not the multiverse?
I got that out of there.
multiverse.
Right? It's like
Yeah.
there's my brain flushing it out, right? Again, the how we perceive something can really change our experience of it, and whether that's at the mental level of our perceptions and beliefs, or it's at the emotional level about what we're feeling, it's an active role. The more we move into a protective stance, and I remember this was not long after I had that significant breakthrough in the spring that led to just a significant transformation for me this year. I had a dream, and the dream was really weird. I have a beautiful Jeep. You have a nice one too.
A bit more beautiful than
Well,
yours.
I think mine is better than yours, but and then Trevor drives a Corolla, a Forerunner.
It's a forerunner.
Forerunner, right. I always get
Hang
that
on,
wrong.
I'll put it in the show notes. Forerunner.
Get that wrong. But in the dream, I was admiring. I was walking away and admiring, but it wasn't my Jeep. It was some other kind of truck, but a truck that had been souped up and all this stuff, because I've done a lot of stuff to my Jeep. And then in the dream, I come back and I can notice that the doors are open from a distance. I'm going, what's going on? And as I get closer to it, I recognize that all of the Jeep's been, or the truck representing my Jeep's been stripped down. All the parts that I invested have been ripped off of it. And it's down to its basic shell. And I woke up in a start. And I recognized in that moment that what I was afraid of, I got present to what that dream meant for me, is I was fearful that these significant breakthroughs that I was experiencing, that I would lose them.
Right.
And so I was feeling fear. And so fear, what is fear? Protect. Right? Protect.
Yep.
Go into
That
protection.
I'm at
Close.
risk.
Yep.
Right? But when we're living out of fear, if we can recognize fear, we can move through it. If we don't recognize that fear is motivating us, we begin to close down. And when we close down, to your point, yes, we may be protecting ourselves from outside things coming in, but it doesn't filter. It doesn't know what to filter, good or
Right.
bad. And so we end up blocking ourselves off. It's the walls we build to protect ourselves often become the prison of our own making. And it's this whole notion of openness and nurturing and paying attention and leaning in.
Takes real courage.
It does. Huge.
So we've got some. What I've heard here are a number of practical things that people can do to begin to embrace and to understand emotion. One is certainly identify the emotions when
Pay
they come
attention.
in.
Put a sticker
Pay
on it.
attention and put a
And
sticker.
you know what's
I love
really
that
helpful?
language. Put
What's
a sticker
really
on it.
we talk about identifying your feelings. One tool that I know we've talked about this together.
feeling wheel.
The feeling
I
wheel.
know,
Let's-
I wanted
that.
I mean, this seems almost like, I remember what first it was suggested to me, and I
Yeah.
said, like, "Are you kidding me? A
Yeah.
feeling wheel?" And yet now it's
I was like, oh my God, there's so many.
Right. So we'll put the feeling wheel in the show
Okay,
notes.
let's
but-
describe.
Can we describe it? Or are you in a
Okay.
hurry? Are you in a
No,
real hurry?
no, go
Lunch.
ahead.
I think lunch is almost here.
Lunch is almost here.
Okay, so the feeling wheel is it starts in the center with a few core emotions, and then it starts to break those down in more and more nuance. And so as you go out, kind of row after row, you get a way more nuanced expression of those feelings, right? And so basically your range of stickers that you can put on an emotion grows
Right.
with each ring. And it's useful sometimes because we go, I've got the feeling, I can't quite put my finger on it. You can literally look at this thing
Right.
and go, there it is.
Yeah.
It's this feeling. I'm feeling guilt, or I'm feeling frustrated.
And
or I'm
when you
feeling
think why
whatever.
that's important, you can't really heal it till you can feel it. So when you're able
I like
to
that
identify,
rhymed. I like
thank
that
you.
rhymed.
Well
But I didn't come
Can't
up with
feel it.
yeah. But this notion of once you can identify it, then you're better armed. Like they say, like
little
naming
less
it is half the
powerful.
battle. It's less
There
powerful.
was no rhythm there.
I don't know. I completely missed what you just said.
It's okay.
It's okay. But again, so the feeling wheel can be very useful. I'd also say, without getting into it, a couple of therapeutic models that are tremendously useful, both on the mindset front and I would say equally powerful on the feelings front because they are tied together, is cognitive behavioral therapy.
Yep.
And rational behavior, emotive behavior therapy,
therapy.
REBT, CBT. These are models that are actually designed for the user to learn, where it's often used in therapy for sure, but the goal is for the therapist to teach the model to the person that they're working with so that they can learn how to use this to challenge negative thinking, challenge negative emotions, and reset and begin to do what we've been talking about, which is create your reality more deliberately and more meaningfully and more intentionally.
We can throw links to that.
I was going to say, let's throw
notes.
some links in the notes to maybe a couple of some white papers or whatever that we've seen, some articles that we think are really speak to those some of those theories. Let me just because I want to talk relationships.
Yes.
And so, but to just kind of sum up with the emotions, we want to identify them. Let's use the feeling wheel and other components that we can use to really understand what am I feeling. I think it's important as another practical step is to separate. You are not your feelings. Is another important thing to do, is to recognize that you are not defined by them. They are not you. They are something you're experiencing. I think a great question that you brought up earlier that I heard, once you've identified a feeling, what's it saying? What's it telling me?
What's the message?
I'm feeling tired. Well, have you slept? Or I'm feeling sad. Is it because you haven't slept? Or you're hungry? Whatever it is. What is it telling you? What's the message behind the feeling? I think is any other that I didn't pull out of what I was listening to as you were sharing.
Along with the messages, you have to test it.
Test the message.
Is it
yes.
true?
It's
Is
the,
it true?
It's
Is
the
it true?
dispute because, and in both CBT and REBT, is when you recognize there's an activating event. We form a belief around, so something happens.
Yeah.
We form a belief around what happens, and then we feel a consequence, or there's a consequence. And so usually the consequence is a negative emotion, if something that happened that upsets you. But the thing is, if it's ABC, activating event, belief, and consequence, A does not cause C.
Right.
B
does.
causes C. So
A is just A.
A is just A.
Shit happens. Actions happen.
It's
Good
what
things,
shows
bad
up on
things.
your front step. It's challenging those initial thoughts and beliefs that are forming in your mind and choosing your. We talk about this, choosing your way forward as opposed to coasting or drifting. It's disputing or refuting those negative beliefs that are leading to both further negative actions, reactions, emotions, and the rest. So it's learning to be a more selective, a chooser of what you will embrace in terms of this is what's true.
Yeah.
Right.
Loving well internally to ourselves.
Yeah, that's where it all starts.
And then loving well with others.
Yeah.
How does this notion of heart and relationships play into the living richly mindset?
You attract what you believe.
Oh, yeah.
Attract what you believe.
So true.
I look back. I'm very grateful to be in an incredible relationship right now with a wonderful woman by the name of Kate. And what I would say is probably for the first time in my life, we met sort of post a lot of this work. She was on a journey of her own, and I was on a journey of my own. Both, I think, coming into this relationship more whole than we've ever been. For the first time, again, remember that my belief was that I don't deserve anything good, that people are better off without me, that I would often give and serve and go over the top to try to balance the ledger. And so what did I end up doing? Choosing relationships where I would be the primary caregiver. And I wouldn't be. It wouldn't be reciprocal. So I had this. I was in this cycle of being in relationships with people who couldn't nurture me back. And I can tell you again, doing the work, learning to love myself, accept myself for who I am, feeling like I'm no longer coming into a relationship as half a man. I quoted that song by Dean something, I forget now, in my story about how can I say I love you when I don't love who I am? How can I give you all of me when I'm only half a man? Well, that was my story for so long. And I think the difference now of being in a relationship where both of us are whole and becoming more whole all the time, and yet it's far more giving, it's far more nurturing mutually, right? And I think the biggest dimension to me, shift-wise, relationship-wise, has been in doing all of this work, sharing that journey with someone for the first time ever, where we're able to have, and I think you've talked about this a lot too, right? This notion of we're not at this necessarily at the same place. We're each living out our own journey, but we're on the path together. And what a different experience from anything I've had before.
And to be able to welcome that, I know that in the past, because of my scripts and because of what I would tell myself, I would often sabotage a relationship before I could get hurt.
I'm going to leave you before you leave me.
I'm going to fuck this up before anything else happens.
Right.
And in doing the work and embracing,
Rob launches his nukes first.
Shots fired.
In embracing that, to be in a place now where I can embrace the emotions and embrace the vulnerability and to welcome it and to be alive in it.
It's so liberating,
it is
isn't it?
so freeing and it is so incredible. And then, and you guys know this, is that I remember early on in the relationship that I have currently that with Wendy, that I would even say to you guys, there was some things about joking. I would say, listen, guys, I don't joke about that with me.
Right.
I don't want that anymore because I want to be so true and focused in on this relationship. And I've talked about, Wendy and I have created our own rituals around how to do that. And it was interesting. I was out Saturday night with some guys having some cigars and enjoying some company like that. But I was eager to get back home, knowing that I didn't want to miss one of the rituals that Wendy and I have, which is every night before we go to sleep, we lay in bed, we got a single light on that just gives enough that we can see each other's face, and we just talk. We talk about nothing, about everything, about a moment, but that openness and embracing all of this stuff about living richly with someone. Totally different journeys,
Right.
Different, right? We're not having to locked in with each other's journey. We're on the path separately, but together.
Right.
And it's such, to your point, liberating is probably one of the best words, to recognize this is somebody that I'm now committed to long term because it started with the emotions.
When you connect better with yourself, and I think this again, this is where it starts, right? It's interesting. My core values, part of the work that was transformative earlier this year. I used to think of courage, curiosity, connection, compassion as external. These are things that I did out here. But what did it mean to be courageous for me?
Right.
What did it mean to connect with me? What did it mean for me to be curious about my own interior world, my own internal world? What did it mean to extend compassion? And so I've actually rephrased all of my my core values that they actually all start internally. But that means when I do that work, then when I show up in all of my roles and relationships, as a dad, as a friend, as a coach, wherever I show up more fully. I show up less stuck. I show up less hindered, and so more can flow through me. And this again is a big definition of living richly. Is when you have full access to all of the resources of mind, heart, spirit, and body. Think of how different your life could be.
Right.
And it all begins with just taking some of those steps.
You mentioned your kids. Another place where you love well when you first understand and be able. So we do things out of fear, obligation, guilt.
Yep. Fog.
Right? The fog. And so we make decisions. Oh, I better do this because they're going to, or whatever that. When you really get to this point of being able to understand and to embrace emotions within, now you're able to love out of a place of desire and want, not obligation and guilt.
Right.
And that's where the freedom comes.
Right. 100%.
It's so powerful. So powerful.
I think for me, it's learning that just about every love song is a lie. right? In the sense
Isn't
that
right? Isn't it hard to find a meme about relationships or a graphic or a poem or something that is not
actually healthy.
full of bullshit?
so the whole "you complete me."
Bullshit.
It's like no,
No, you
no,
don't.
no. That's the problem.
Right.
That's the problem.
Right.
Is people are trying to fill in the incomplete parts of themselves with other people. And like that's the lie. That's the lie. And so like truly, like just about every love song or relationship song is "I can't live without you." I'm like, yeah, we can. We can. We want to choose someone for a healthy reason, not because we're dependent on them. It's because we're in a good, healthy place. What you just described with Wendy Rob around, I want to get home
Right.
because we connect.
Right.
Right? We just talk about everything about nothing. That's like emotions are the connective tissues of relationship. And if we don't have access to our emotions, what do you think's holding things together? Like not much.
Right.
Right? We've got fragile relationships. So I think it's that element around truly owning our own emotions and not counting on the other person to fill in our emotional gaps.
Right.
So they fully own theirs. We fully own ours, and we bring our completeness together.
Right.
Like that is where you get a good, healthy relationship.
100%.
And I say
Love
that
that.
because, Carrie and I, we've been together a long time, right? And I've already told you a whole big chunk of time emotionally shut off, right? Carrie's got her own journey, her own story as well. But to be in a place where we've now been working at this stuff for a while, stumbling, fumbling, dropping the ball, trying again, but to bit by bit, like maturing this, right? Slowly by slowly, piece by piece, finding our way, finding ourselves, which is scary
Yeah.
in a relationship because you kind of go, well, what if I do this and find out that's not going to work? Well, then that's not going to work.
Right.
But what if you find out you do this and it is? Right. And that's where we start to, we start to bring courage to these choices and the discovery as we work our way through, because none of us know where any of this ends.
Right.
Right. We only have the now and to work our way through that now. And so it's to be able to continue to discover that together.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think at the heart of it, it's this notion of, again, going back to the phrase that really stands out for me is becoming a masterful heartist.
Right.
Being skilled in matters of the heart.
Right.
And how do you become skilled? You practice,
Practice.
right? You learn, you find people that you admire that are good at this stuff, and you build a relationship with them. You read what you need to read, you study what you need to study, and then you practice to the point where stuff that was out of reach now becomes part of your daily experience.
We're going to be spending a lot of time talking about this element as well as the other elements. I know that we're almost an hour into our conversation again, and I think we could again go hours and hours. So we will be revisiting and having more conversations around this. But let me encourage you. One of the things you can do is go to the website, livingrichley.me /ACT, ACT, and we'll have a link there for the feelings wheel, so that you can start identifying to learn. And it's just such a great tool, as well as some of the practical tips that we've been talking about today will be listed there. So encourage you to do that.
You're still here an hour later, so subscribe if you haven't already.
Might as well.
You're in this far, let's face it. Let's keep going together. We don't want you to miss anything. We'll continue to share the information and all of these stories with you, and we want to hear from you as well.
And as we've been saying, this is better in community. You can do this work on your own, but it's tough. So invite someone you know. Share the podcast with them. Perhaps set up conversations to follow up on what you hear and see what that means for you. But share the journey with someone that's important to you. It'll make a world of difference.
Thanks for being on the journey with us. And until next time, we just really do appreciate each and every one of you.